I welcome one and all to the second week of the BVI's first literary festival, to be known as the BVI Lit Fest. I trust many have enjoyed the first annual address by the Virgin Islands Poet Laureate delivered at our opening ceremony at the beginning of Culture and Tourism Month on the 1st of November. I was also pleased to hear that the Writing with Writers workshops last week on poetry, nonfiction, and publishing filled quickly. Today we begin our Let's Talk Lit panel discussions. I'm so excited by the accomplishments and talent of the panel participants. We will have the Virgin Islands Magic Fiction panel, the First Tongues Poetry panel, the Enter, Delete, Craft and Technique essay panel, and the Unseen Race and Gender in VI Society's Nonfiction Talk. Intrigued? So am I. I welcome you to the second week of the BVI Lit Fest.
Welcome to the 2021 BVI Literary Festival. A first-of-its-kind festival that celebrates and promotes a love of literature and writing in the Virgin Islands. This week's event features a Let's Talk Lit panel discussion series with authors, essayists, and poets like Andre Bagu, Amanda Chukwan, Amilcar Sanatan, Tammy Navarro, Tiffany Yannick, Cadwell Turnbull, Raymond Antrobus, Des Seaburan, and Kinesia Lubrin. The BVI Literary Festival is a collaboration between the Department of Culture and the H. Lavity Community College, and is brought to you by the National Bank of the Virgin Islands, CCT, 284 Media, Alaman and Cadero, Nook Bookshop, and the Poet Laureate Program. And now, your moderator for tonight's panel, Andre Bagu. Andre Bagu is a poet and writer from Trinidad, the author of several books of poetry including Trick Vessels, Burn, and Pitch Lake. His poetry has appeared in journals such as Boston Review, Cincinnati Review, St. Petersburg Review, PN Review, Poetry, and the Poetry Review. He was awarded the Charlotte and Isidore Payewanski Prize in 2017. His essay collection, The Undiscovered Country, was published by People Tree Press in 2020 and won the 2021 OCM Bookus Prize for Nonfiction. His fiction debut, The Dreaming, is forthcoming from Peepal Tree. Please welcome Andre Bagu.
Hello, welcome to the First Tongues Poetry panel here at the inaugural BVI Lit Fest. We've had a wonderful series of panel discussions and workshops, and it's really been a privilege to be a part of it all. I'm Andre Bagu, and with us tonight are the poets Desiree Sebran, Raymond Antrobus, and Kinesia Lubrin, all of whom are very different poets, but who nonetheless all calibrate language in service of their overall artistic vision. These are also all poets who have thought deeply about the many divides they unite and who remind us powerfully of the complexity of being in an age obsessed with crass, dehumanizing strategies of politics, capital, and race. Tonight, I'm going to talk to all of the poets about their poetics, but first, we're going to hear from them. The first segment of our program will be readings from each poet. Then, after a short break, we will engage in discussion. And finally, open up the floor to questions from the audience, which you can post on our social media feeds for those of you watching live. So firstly, Desiree Sebran. Desiree Sebran is a Trinidadian writer and editor. She is an alum of the Cropper Foundation Residential Workshop for Writers 2010 and the inaugural Moko Magazine Poetry Masterclass 2018. Desiree is also a past, and I dare say future contributor to Moko Magazine, as indeed are all of our panelists tonight, I believe. Her work has been shortlisted for the 2014 Small Axe Literary Competition for Poetry and the 2017 Fonterre Poetry Award for New Poets. Her poem Pikong won the 2019 Queen Mary Wasafiri New Writing Prize for Poetry. Desiree is the winner of the 2021 Johnson and Amoy Achong Caribbean Writers Prize. Welcome, Desiree.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm going to read 3 pieces for you guys today. The first one is entitled Canal Water. Muddy, endless, every building's beaten wood laid slatternly, every mossy bridge post broken. Blistered walkways through fierce grass centuries and winsome mud, elegaic mud that sings of lost shoes, the sea smell of the canal, and the sea stone sluice in the distance, stubborn along a grey horizon. Now that the canals flow again, there are shoals of fish to be caught by mud-singed bare children. There are stolid collections of snails near the water and long-beaked birds as the canal water strobes past, reflecting low-hanging mangoes and cashew trees, buoying their puckered fruit toward God. A horde of jeweled blue dragonflies bless the water on their way to the interior. This is home, my mother's eyes say with smile creases, and the hurried step of a young girl into the creaking foyer, her hand on the brass doorknob. Here was Grandma and Grandpa's room, and this was the kitchen where the pressure cooker exploded and cracked the roof. This was the dark alcove painted white where she slept. Was it really so small? And I am incredulous that she lived in a closet. Then we discuss how treacherous the floor sounds, and how no paint can help these Purple Heart walls, and how unsafe the current tenant must feel. I say the words, demolish it, and I see the small child inside my mother's eyes stop skipping and ask for her grandfather's calm hand to steady her. His house cannot speak for him, but the wind screams through the roof. After one time is another. The next poem is called The Sweetest Horn. And horn in Trinidadian dialect parlance means to cheat on somebody that you're in a romantic relationship with. So hopefully that clarifies stuff for you. Is bloody like your tongue, split by half-truths and heartsick. It is floating, rocky, probing my sex with ungentle licks, sucking away at the marrow of us. The sweetest horn is verse in iambus, a beautiful fellatio, tearing tendon from stone, womb from wound, breaking my bones into rows and rows of questions and insomnia. It is Kabbalistic, a dark mania of mangrove rot, sinking love's lush mouth into me, dry-eyed and enraged. The sweetest horn is unpaved, throbbing to an Orphic dead end, a maw of cracked obsidian, unforgiving. It is the dragon's mouth, lashed with teeth, a neonate, flirted with lanugo. It cries, and I yield tetrameter like mother's milk. You and I and she, we move as with a metronome. The sweetest horn is made of silk, soft shroud that fits me light as foam. Now bury me. She's almost home. And the last piece I'm reading for you guys today is called Bone. I've never touched a dead body, but one night, Pearl left her grave to find me, screaming across the fence that her lipstick and wig were uglier than death. They were. And when had I ever seen her wear a dress with no structure? When I woke up, the arm that I used to wipe tears in my dream was stony at the elbow. Tendon and ligament turned cold. And then I stopped viewing corpses for fear of what they would accuse me of in my sleep. For instance, my grandmother, despite her rigor at the time, may have been annoyed that my father and his brothers declined to wear white to her funeral. She only nagged them about it for 20 years. Each glimpse of her dark skin and closed eyes on satin caused my fingers' fibrous muscle to calcify. Or my neighbor, who withered under a blitzkrieg of tumors, may have had words to say about holding his wife's hand while dying in bed. He did not die alone, but if he saw anything beyond his pain, he must have realized that she would never recover. At the church, I could not avoid the coffin. The flowers at his chest brushed my hip, locking it into an ossified bruise, like his widow's lips. And my great aunt may have briefly objected to how long her third stroke took to kill her. I could be wrong. She was acquainted with rictus long before I was born, with her stiffened arm and leg, and calm conversations with a man who denied their child. She's died, but one photo, her wide mouth that would make a wry joke. This photo slipped into the pile, and I felt my left eye become dense, heavy as salt. I make no exceptions now. The dead begin a boil in me, fingers clenching deep, and I fly awake, forcing air into stiffening lungs. Friends stopped asking me to sit Shiva because my silence is not traditional. You can't speak when bone infests your tongue. Thank you.
Thank you, Desiree, for those incredible poems that really bring to light personal histories within a very strong sense of a geographic setting as well. Our next poet is Raymond Antrobus. Raymond Antrobus was born in Hackney, London, to an English mother and Jamaican father. He is the author of To Sweet and Bitter and The Perseverance. In 2019, he became the first ever poet to be awarded the Rathbone Folio Prize for Best Work of Literature in any genre. Other accolades include the Ted Hughes Award, the Poetry Book Society Winter Choice, a Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year Award, and a Guardian Poetry Book of the Year 2018, as well as being shortlisted for the Griffin Prize alongside Canisia and Forward Prize. In 2018, he was awarded the Geoffrey Dermer Prize judged by Ocean Vuong. His poem Jamaican British from The Perseverance was added to the GCSE syllabus in 2019. His most recent collection, All the Names Given, was last month shortlisted for the 2021 T.S. Eliot Prize. Raymond, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here, Andre. Great reading, Des. Can't wait to hear your poems as well, Canisia. I'm going to be reading from All the Names Given. I'm going to read two poems from this book. The first poem I'm going to read is called Plantation Paint, and it's inspired in part by by the poet Lorna Goodison, the former poet laureate of Jamaica. She, as well as being a poet, is a painter. And while I was living in New Orleans, in the South of America, I'd come across a painting called A Plantation Burial, which you can Google and have a look at this painting for yourself if you want. It's currently held in the Historic New Orleans collection. It was painted in 1860 by a man called John Antrobus. And one of the significances of him having the same surname as me, Antrobus, is Antrobus is a locational name. So anyone with the name can be linked to this village in Cheshire. So as soon as I meet anyone with that name, I just assume in some way we are ancestors. And this painting that I'd come across by sheer coincidence prompted this conversation with my wife, called Tabitha, who is an art conservator, and she was talking about the black men that are in this painting, and how the paint that's used to depict their skin color will be the first part of that painting to decay, because of the low quality that has been used on the depiction of black skin in, it seems, most European art throughout the centuries. And this is just something that's being revised now in the art conservation world. And so some of that appears in this poem as well. Plantation paint. Tabitha, the art conservator, squints at the color, tells me the paint depicting the black of these men huddled for a burial will decay before the cypress trees surrounding them will decay. There are several kinds of black, she says, and the cypress trees surrounding them is all I see as we stand alive in this otherwise empty gallery. Why am I like this? What am I like? Who does it matter to? All details question my way of seeing. I worry what kind of black would mark me. I am not the paint made from vine twigs or burnt shells. I am not the lamp full of oil. Tabitha, tell me how you paint me. Tell me if I'm closer to the white painter with my name than I am to the black preacher, his hands wide to the sky, the mahogany rock of heaven. Sorry, but you know by now, but I can't mention trees without every shade of my family appearing and disappearing. The last poem I'm going to read is for a friend of mine who committed suicide fairly recently. His name was Tyrone Givens. And when it happened, it obviously is such a shock. And I didn't know if I was ever going to write about it, actually. But I was given a commission, actually, to respond to one of the human rights declarations, and reading Article 5 inspired it. So this is the Article 5 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. No one shall be subjected to torture, to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. And thinking about some of the stuff that happened to Tyrone, he was about to start a prison sentence, and his hearing aids were taken away from him. None of his supervisors, none of the wardens, no one that he was sharing any space with knew sign language or had any deaf awareness. And we lost Tyrone in that isolation, injustice, mismanagement. One thing I would say as well, James Baldwin appears in this poem because during the pandemic, I'd realized I hadn't read every James Baldwin novel, and I had to fix that. So during the pandemic, I read all of Baldwin's novels, and I realized that every novel has a suicide in it. So because that was in my mind at the time, James Baldwin appears in this poem for Tyrone Givens. The paper said, putting him in jail without his hearing aids was like putting him in a hole in the ground. There are no hymns for deaf boys, but who can tell we're deaf without speaking to us? Tyrone's name is spelled in the HMP Pentonville prison system. Once I was handcuffed, shoved into a police van. I didn't hear the officer say why. I was saved by my friend's mother, who threw herself in the road and refused to let the van drive away. Who could have saved Tyrone? James Baldwin attempted suicide after each of his loves jumped from bridges or overdosed. He killed his characters, made them kill themselves. Tyrone, Rufus, Richard, black men who couldn't live like this. Tyrone, I won writing awards, bought new hearing aids, and heard my name through the walls. I bought a signed Baldwin book. The man who sold it to me didn't know you, me, or Baldwin. I feel I rescued it. I feel failed. Tyrone, the last time I saw you alive, I dropped my pen on the staircase. Didn't hear it fall, but you saw and ran down to get it. Handed it to me before disappearing, said, you might need this. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond, for that incredibly moving reading. And, you know, it just reminds us of the power of poetry to not only interrogate the past or the unfolding catastrophe of history, rather, but also to act as a prism through which we interrogate with and process our current experiences, and to some extent enact justice where there has been injustice. And, you know, your mention of Baldwin in this poem in particular reminded me of Giovanni's Room, which is a book that's a touchstone for me as well, a kind of a cautionary reminder of some of the fraught issues faced by so many people across so many intersections, including members of the LGBTQ community. So thank you very much for that. Next, Canisia Luprin. Writer, critic, editor, and teacher Canisia Luprin grew up in St. Lucia. She studied at York University and earned an MFA at the University of Guelph. Luprin is the author of the 2021 OCM Bocas Prize winning poetry collection, The Dysgraphist, which is also awarded the 2021 Griffin Poetry Prize, and Voodoo Hypothesis, which is named a CBC Best Poetry Book and shortlisted for the Raymond Souster Award. Her work has been translated into Italian and Spanish. Luprin was a 2019 writer-in-residence at Queen's University and has taught in the English department at Humber College. She has worked as an arts administrator and a community advocate for nearly 20 years and lives in Canada. Welcome, Canisia.
Thank you very much, Andre. It's lovely to be here with Raymond and Des. And I would like to also extend my thanks to everyone involved with the BVI Lit Fest. Thank you for convening us in poetry and otherwise. I will read a poem which is inspired or based on Dion Brand's considerations of thresholds in her book, A Map to the Door of No Return. It's called What New Map? 1. According to water, suppose howls like thresholds spread, as well as any virus while we are water over stone, while only a child sees the wind swell into birds, any speech worth any start. All signs we exist in the same earth, swept into a dust pile behind a door. In the black, we sail from. The blue hills shake with the animals' appetites, with all life, and a soupçon of lime. We enter, grow farther from dirt. We, though untrained for this life, like the garden's new nakedness, stretch into engines, into kindling, into horns. Music as ruffle of silk. Soundless we go, as cotton, verdigris, a diet of fruit and alarm. 4 according to the door. Suppose a girl traces, touches the place of a door in its act of closing our blue penciled lives. We careen, hold air, water, seaside, mammals, the disappeared. If our plea for wings, for the watered people homed in our livers, could now refuse even light, what hardness would know us? By paper and bone, by currents, by more. Suppose our lives litter. Suppose we magnitude 7.3 and pocketless can soon be swiped, can pass without injury between these infrastructures of ghosts, boats from which 1 or 2 of us break rain. And we can name 12 compasses harping 500 knocks on our doors. Life as time spent with names turns to bury in the windswept years. 5 according to Stone. A country overhears 2 fault lines as the world cuts its keys on the least we've known, on our coming back shorn from the limits of our non-existence. While we sleep, Haiti eats. Any line that speaks, Lionola, look how we search and pity. Look how we whirled and embrace, and now pass among us and our new friends. Look how we storm and gripe the deep drum of you. When they come, crown them with a coffin for your daring, another for your light, another yet for your eye that never closes. What is rest here to the girlhood fury you were? 6 according to the road, when of course to close a bend at the approach of these stranded others. An eye matte with lassie, another with a story from Colombo, brushed on lavish cotton, hardening the sea. Oceans must wreck all windows pocked with condensate. All these ways following exile, ebullient, following the blue maroon. Suppose these sentences cliff again, with everything already gone. Come patch a mile with our bellies, simple and violent here. 7 according to the mouth. With silence as musical as science, let us in, portraitist. Nobody is allegory here. The map distrusts the photograph as any force would imagine itself pressed into mark. We know what rupture, what blossom, what again is a pencil sharpening, if not a voice, a note we hear breathe its leaden life in the middle of a sentence, beyond a skull trapping our sound, cyst-like, a single screw welded to a graphite bell, our dull memory, counterpoint for the opening. From Soufriere to Cape Town, we canvass for Jouvert. 8 according to the brush. The road uphill is like a crooked easel. A mule-like woman throws at the sky. A wood reused since the century was new, to folding the smalling world into. Or any ordinary talk closer to gust and firefly would bury these crimes that sleep with us and themselves. Tell the organ that knows me best is over there I gone, is the ciel I want around this geography of somebody I love. Black and all careworn like my hair, pulled to gray from myself. How to say I see and hello, as if my foot, an hour ago my hand, must no longer turn the daily oar. Ferocious as this, we close and then scatter into life. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Kinesia. I have so much I have to ask. There's so many things I would like to talk to you all about. But first, we're going to have a very short commercial break, and we'll be right back to begin our discussion.
We know that where you choose to bank matters, and it is your vote on what your funds do in strengthening our community. As your official Bank of Paradise, we invest and support the lifeblood of our economy by helping in the realization of personal goals for homeownership, education, and entrepreneurial visions, which support small businesses. We make it our place to connect with persons and worthy causes, and we have been doing so for more than 30 years. Where your money goes and what your dollars empower are your choice. And we thank you for choosing us, a bank that gives where it matters the most, for you, for our community, and a happier tomorrow. From all of your neighbors at the National Bank of the Virgin Islands.
Is about these people.
It's always a pleasure coming to you live and direct from the
What's poppin'? What's really good?
Davis has won it for the Lakers!
Welcome back. So I'd just like to begin the conversation by asking all of the poets a little bit about their views on the idea or the process of reading a poem aloud, reciting the poem. Reciting a poem obviously offers a lot of opportunities as well as challenges depending on the nature of the text. And I was wondering, how do each of you approach reading your work? Because you all read in so many in different and distinct ways. Do you see performance as integral to the unfolding of the poem? Is performance something that you consider while composing or writing the poem? How important is the performative aspect of poetry to your overall poetics? I'm going to start. Let me start with Des.
So I was just thinking how very early in my journey as a poet, I really hated to read my own work aloud. Um, that was when I was at university, so I would always read other poets' work aloud um, because sound is very important to me, and to me, the poets that I love, their work sounds a particular way, or it has rhythm. I shouldn't say it sounds a particular way. They have distinctive ways of writing, so there's a distinctive rhythm to their work um, that even though it's meant for the page, most of the people that as I said, that I really look at and admire, I remember the first poem that I really honestly fell in love with was Yeats' No Second Troy, which is a sonnet. Um, but just the sound of it sounds not like a sonnet. You read some sonnets and it sounds like, da 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 da, the structures there. It sounds like speech. It sounds like a pained somebody talking to his friend. but it's almost perfect fun. So I would say it's pretty important to me. Sound is very important to me. Um, so I've learned to read my stuff aloud, to hear it, to hear the rhythms, to kind of refine it, to make it, better, to make it flow, to make the images crisper or sharper, pop more, hit more. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where I am on that.
Yeah, definitely. And perhaps Raymond, is there something? I mean, what are your well, obviously, sound is very important for you because your work is directly engaging with it. I mean, how do you approach your own reading?
Its own kind of direction of speaking and intention. Like there are definitely poems which I feel belong or speak louder or quieter on the page. That's different. Like there are certain poems that I'm like, I wouldn't read these at readings, and certain poems that I would. And I think that's not something that enters my mind as I'm writing the poem at all, actually. I often find that most of the poems that I write, I need to read them out loud in public at least once before I know how they feel and what it is they're up to. It is interesting that I feel like my practice and my process relies so much on not just my own ear and my own eye, but also the ear and eye of others. And writing during the pandemic, and writing even all the names given during the pandemic has been very different to writing The Perseverance, my first book, because I feel like The Perseverance was a book which was worked out live in front of people on a stage. I was kind of editing a lot of those poems as I was performing them. I was going away from the performances, the readings that I was giving, and I was making adjustments and feeling them in my voice, in my body, and the sound of them, and then also sculpting that onto the page, which is its own arena. And also it's an ongoing thing. Like I don't feel resolved. I don't feel like I've cracked this idea of how to perform a poem or how to write a poem or placing a poem of where it best belongs. But I am comfortable with this idea of having different versions of poems. So I have, like, even with the book, there's the book is one version of these poems. Another version of the poems is the audio version, which is slightly different. And then another version is the live version, where I collaborate with British Sign Language performers and interpreters who also create their own version or feeling of the poems. So I like that idea that the poem and the book and the experience are all alive in the world as their own kind of entities and experiences.
I love that. Yeah, they're like their own independent. They have this symbiotic kind of relationship. Can you say, do you see that? Is that how you look at it as well when you're approaching sound in your poems?
Thank you for the question. It's a good one. And I think it's a question that will be perpetually asked because it attends to the very roots of poetry. Poetry never left the voice. And when I say the voice, I don't mean simply auditory stimuli, poetry is song, it's sound. That's what we do when we enter poetry. Because language, for me, is a kind of organism that relies on the sensorium of our frequencies in the world. And I think as a species, the human species, a part of that is how we voice ourselves into being. And that does not, it does not demand that our impulses for communication and imagination be reduced only to speaking. It's deeper than that. Yeah. If I can, if I can just lean on what poet Joy Harjo was saying a few days ago in her Wyndham Campbell lecture, she was referring to actors being metaphorical beings, and then connecting that to poetry. Poetry is a kind of metaphorical being, which is full of brilliant creativity and, in fact, larger than the human imagination. And so, what poetry allows for us to do is to be in physiological communion with something that's a lot bigger than the physiological, and so for me, sound is really deeply important. I cannot think in poetry without sound. I cannot exist in poetry without sound. And what I mean by that is really just the primordial, deep down frequencies of our being and movement and interaction with the world, because language itself is metaphorical. All of language is metaphorical. It represents something. Yeah. And so this invitation to sound something of the imagination into being, it arrived at the page much later on than where it began, in our voices, in our voicings, and in our expressions of a communication that exceeds language itself. So I think we're trying to get at that thing that's beyond language always, and really, when I found my poetry. I think I found my own music in a way that I felt comfortable and confident enough to further explore by reading Dion Brand's work. In that music in No Language is Neutral, that where it starts, this is you, girl, this cut of road up to Blanchisseuse, this every turn a piece of blue and earth carrying on, beating rock and ocean, this wearing away, smoothing the insides of pearl and shell and coral. That music right there, it did something to me that I simply could not have predicted. And it was deeper than the words and the speech. It was deeper than the auditory, and so, yes, I have to read out loud at some point, not necessarily in public like Raymond, but I have to read aloud at some point the work that I'm composing in order for me to really hear it and feel it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
forming sentences and writing basically. And of course, I see your book as metaphorically playing with this idea of, just as there's this disconnect between the page and the mind in this process, so too is there a disconnect between how we confront history and reality in today's world, where people they can't quite grapple with that complexity. That's how, I mean, that is in my reading of it. And I was wondering, on the level of the line in your work, how, first of all, how do you see your project? Do you see it as relating to history, and do you see the language on that very minute level of the line as being all a part of that?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. You're not wrong. You are not wrong. There is a kind of gesture I make to the orthography of dysgraphia. Conceptually, I am springing off a board that has been extended by Christina Sharp in her work In the Wake on Blackness and Being, where she theorizes a kind of dysgraphia related to blackness and black being in the world, where the kind of reduction that Black people tend to be subsumed into regarding social media and the news, and those stereotypes and those news stories that continually pathologize and criminalize Black people, and how fast that spreads, and thinking of that as a kind of miswriting of us, in the world, a kind of difficult writing, as dysgraphia is. Yeah, but for me, in many ways, we are always in history, whether we are explicit about how we recognize that, how we interact with that, is another matter. As Brand says in A Map Through the Door of No Return, history is already seated in the chair. History is already in the room when we arrive. Natalie Diaz, who was a part of that conference, said something similar about memory. She said memory is still happening. It's not something that somehow has stopped, or we just look back and see, but there's a kind of interruption of linearity, right? In thinking, thinking through how one grapples with the consequences of being alive in the world, and just history being that thing that we are always already implicated in, So yes, there is a kind of tangoing, a kind of wrestling with the difficulties of history bearing down on the present, in a kind of continuance of life after something as just, in my mind, it's still very ungraspable for me, the history of the transatlantic slave trade, and the way our lives are tangled up and intersected in this moment. So yes, it's on the level of the line. I am trying to attend to the kind of intimacy that one brushes up against, even when one is thinking of really big concepts, or things like that.
Definitely, and I'm reminded of I think Walter Benjamin, philosopher, has a phrase that I keep using over and over, and it is the unfolding catastrophe of history, which I think sums it up pretty well. Raymond, your book as well is concerned with the ungraspable to an extent, particularly in your use of a kind of a motif through it, involving this notion of captions and what God.
So pleased to hear that the writing with participant.
Everything.
We know that where you choose to bank matters, and it is your vote on what your funds do in strengthening our community. As your official Bank of Paradise, we invest and support the lifeblood of our economy by helping in the realization of personal goals for homeownership, education, and entrepreneurial visions, which support small businesses. We make it our place to connect with persons and worthy causes, and we have been doing so for more than 30 years. Where your money goes and what your dollars empower are your choice. And we thank you for choosing us, a bank that gives where it matters the most, for you, for our community, and a happier tomorrow. From all of your neighbors at the National Bank of the Virgin Islands.
The win.
What the hell?
I'm freaking out.
Is about these people.
It's always a pleasure coming to you live and direct from the...
What's poppin'? What's really good?
Davis has won it for the
And Raymond, in your book, there's a prevailing motif of the notion of captions or captioning, you know, whether it's the closed captioning we see on television or the subtitles in movies. And there's an examination of, well, what are the limits of what the language in these captions can convey? And I was wondering, you know, how did this come about as a structuring device in your book? And in particular, what was the artistic inspiration that it came from? I understand it was actually based on the work of a very specific artist.
Sorry. So, all right. So, yeah. So the captions in the all right, hold up. hopefully, this will happen. I'm laughing because I've explained this so many times, and then it cuts out. So we'll see if I get through it this time. So yes, there are subtitles or captions that are in the book, and it's used as a kind of deaf poetic. It's in conversation with a number of deaf poets, for example, Meg Day, Ilya Kaminsky, Josephine Dickinson, and there's a lot of talk around poetry and a poem around you know, white space and what is the silence that's happening in the white space. So captioning and subtitling was a way to engage with the white space or even activate the silence of a poem, and not just the silence within a poem, but also the silence between poems, And the way in which I came to use it was through my own experience of when I watch a film with captions. I don't hear any of the high-pitched sounds in the film, so I don't hear cattles or whistles. So I'll see the caption, a description of the sound appear on the screen, and I won't hear it. I'm invited to imagine that sound. But when I write down a caption and put it onto the book or onto the page, it democratizes that idea. So any reader is also invited into this imagining of sound. And so, yeah, that's part of the function.
That's fascinating. My goodness. I mean, it goes back to what Kinesia just said about, we're always, all of us in history, the same thing, the same moment over and over, and similarly, we are all of us in language all the time. Desiree, you too have been inspired by specific artists in the past, and I know in the past we both have been invited to work with Trinidadian artists like Wendy Nanan. And can you tell me a little bit about your process, in terms of, where do your poems come from? Is it always going to be art, or is it something else?
So it's interesting that we've been talking about silences kind of throughout, the last couple of minutes, because I think my feeling about ekphrastic poetry is because a lot of what I write and what I focus on are these silences in relationships. I write a lot about grief and a lot about what we don't say to the people that we love. So writing in response to art, to me, kind of they go together, because art is about expressing anything, but it's never through words. It's visual. It's all visual. It's all taken in like this. And so playing with that, like what we did with Wendy Nanan. So what I was asked to do, she has these a series of beautiful cricket drawings where she draws with black ink, basically. So it's just paper and black ink and shading, and it's beautiful and it's so descriptive. If you see her the drawings, they're very simple but also very evocative. And I've never loved cricket. I've never liked cricket. Cricket is a very West Indian thing. My father was obsessed with it, is obsessed with it still, I should say. But I always hated cricket until I saw these drawings, and then something about the beauty of the game and the guys playing it, I understood part of why people are obsessed about it, and then being able to write about that, writing about that silence, that moment that she captured, really inspired me. And I hope to do more, more ekphrastic stuff in the future. I've been playing around with the concept, but I think it really works with what I want to do in the future.
So I noticed, so we're talking back to art, but also it seems as though a lot of the panelists are also talking back to literary precursors. Kinesia, you mentioned Dion Brand, and Raymond, you mentioned James Baldwin. So how do you all see, how important is that to you to have that sense of some sort of falling within some sort of conversation within a specific literary context or literary ancestors? Maybe Kinesia?
Sure. You can hear me? Okay. Yeah, again, my sense of this kind of lineage, or a drawing of a kind of lineage of learning and exploration and sensibility is similar to what I said earlier about history being always present, being there, and it's that kind of immaterial material that has very real material consequences. That's a lot of material, but a kind of imprinting that happens when we think of something like how we've come to do the thing we're involved in doing. And so whether we acknowledge that in some kind of explicit way or not, it's going to be there anyway. And so for me, though, writing is a kind of practice of relation. It's a kind of practice of being with others in the world, of being alongside, being in tension, being in harmony, being in dissonance, whatever that is. I'm always hyper aware that I'm making something which relies on a capacious kind of imagination that I could not attend to by myself. Okay, and so I'm always in it with others, even those sources of inspiration or reference or material, back to that M word, who would be almost invisible in the work that I'm doing. I think there's always that kind of shared imaginative space. And I think for me, it's important to acknowledge that when I see it and how I see it. And so I'm always bringing these kinds of convergences into the work. You know, in my last book, I kind of made a poem in the back, in the acknowledgements, calling the people who have helped me think through the things I'm thinking through companions. They're companions in the work, you know? And so I believe deeply in this sense of collaboration, even if it comes in a different form or an unrecognizable form, you know? And so mine are rich and varied. Visual artists, musicians, photographers, you know, thinkers and theorists, philosophers, you name it. You know, there's always, you know, my sphere is multiple and refracting. So yes, it's extremely important for me.
Yeah, perhaps we're all, as writers, part of some sort of open source project of interrogating reality, and we pick up on what's been done before and we carry on the conversation, you know. But Raymond, do you see yourself as part of this ocean of words, you know, where you're engaging in that and also thinking of what you're handing on to the next generation as well?
Yeah, I agree with that. I love that idea of Kinesia kind of creating a poem or even a form of that kind of roll calling and an acknowledgement section. I like that. I might steal that. So there you go. I'm going to put myself in conversation with Kinesia right there, just like that, you know.
There you go.
And you know, like there's these ideas of the pursuit of writing being a very lonely kind of endeavor, but this is how we, you know, keep company. This is how we, you know, how our practice becomes one of solitude rather than loneliness. And there's a difference, you know what I mean? The solitude being that kind of curated loneliness being something you wallowing and can be painful and dangerous even. So yeah, I rely on my ancestors as well as my peers, you know. I think that the work is always richer if it's in conversation, you know, and there's an intention in that I think is important, like who you want to summon, who you want to bring. You know, there's a poem I literally have in All the Names Given where I summon Braithwaite and I just quote him and he ends the poem you know, and it's like a praising and an appraisal as well. You know, all of these kind of mixed forms we can do. And yeah, they're all gifts. They're all gifts for us as well as tools.
For sure. I just wanted to add a little bit to that, that I don't think that anybody becomes any kind of creative, whether you're a writer or artist or a visual artist or you know, a photographer or anything, without seeing work that has gone before you. You know, you are always you as a child or as a teenager, you see something that captures your imagination and you move towards that. So you're always kind of writing back to what you may have read before if you're a writer, or what you would have seen before. I remember Raymond at one point in time saying, you know, when when he's not writing, that he reads, you know, and that's been a really valuable piece of information for me as a sort of emerging poet, you know, that you won't always write all the time. You know, you won't be writing constantly. I mean, writing is a muscle that you need to exercise and you need to be disciplined about it, yes. But when you are not writing your own work, part of doing the work is also reading other person's work, you know, and taking in all the ideas that have been expressed before and, you know, talked about before and written before, and the ways that they have been written, and putting that into the soup of your brain so that you can write and express and write to persons coming up as well.
Yeah, it's a kind of ventriloquism happening as well, you know. And Raymond, I was also thinking of your Claude McKay poem in the book as well, which is a really short but very stunning type of poem. I also wanted to ask, just, you know, we will be opening the floor to questions soon, but I wanted to ask something about all of us here, to some extent, straddle so many different perceived divides, you know. Raymond, you were talking about captioning, and but also you are a person who lives in the, you're in New York now, but you know, you straddle this divide between Jamaican and British, you know, and I think to some extent, all of us, everywhere we go, we're constantly being forced to almost justify or explain, you know, this quite ordinary, to my mind, complexity, I guess. You know, and I was wondering, you know, to what extent does that experience feed into your poetry? Does it affect how you approach your writing? Does it affect how you see the importance of your writing? Does it play a role in the emotions in your writing? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love that F. Scott Fitzgerald quote where he's asked to define intelligence, and he says, you know, intelligence is just having more than one contradictory idea in your head at the same time, you know what I mean, and making sense of it, which just defeats any idea of kind of purity or any absolute kind of you know, a single truth. And one of the things that keeps me going back to poetry is the fact that poetry thrives on complexity. You know, there's no way to be honest and you know, and simplistic. Like, the truth is complicated. You know, if you say, for example, I am happy. The whole poem, I just say, I am happy. I'm just one thing. I am a happy person. That's it. And that's me, the whole poem. But I'm not being honest, because we all know that there's an array of moods and experiences and feelings that one can switch around with, you know, in any given time, any given moment. So what I realize is, you know, for me, even in All Names Given, I rely on a kind of ambivalence or uncertainty while I'm writing, to create this tone of, that allows so much more experiences into the work. I think it's healthy for us in this climate to be suspicious of any idea of purity or any absolution. I think they are myths. I think they are dangerous. Even like any kind of utopian ideas, because utopias are often as much about exclusion as they are about inclusion. So I find it interesting that the poetry gets stronger and thrives as well when it acknowledges contradiction.
And well, finally, I had a question that I wanted to pose to all the panelists, and it was, many of the people looking on are probably poets, who come to events like this just to get advice or tips. And if you were your younger self and you were attending one of the workshops that you might run today, actually, what advice would you give to your younger self? Canicia.
I'm always reluctant to give advice to my younger self. Truly, because I don't want to screw her up. What makes me think that I have anything to say now that would be helpful? All that retrospection is in a way my own projecting into an ideal right now. So I don't know if
maybe that is your advice. Like,
yeah, perhaps,
you're good, girl.
You're all right, yeah. But that was something I always knew. I was fine either way, because whether or not I ever published a single word in all of my life, I was always going to write. That's the deep love that I have for the craft and for the kind of imagination that it allows, because I always felt enriched in it, right? And that beyond any of that, I always viewed it as a kind of icing on the cake, so to speak. But I also knew that there was something to living a life as a writer that if I didn't do, I might feel amputated somehow, from the breadth of myself, and so what would I say to younger me? I would say perhaps it's okay to trust the doubt. It's okay to trust the doubt, because the door that doubt opens up will eventually reveal something that's really capacious, that's really large. Might sound cryptic, but that's it.
Des? If you could go back to Copper in when was it? 2010.
2010.
And sit down next to Professor Funso and just pretend you're Merle Hodge. What would you tell yourself?
Would I even listen? That's a question. I tend to agree with Canicia, but I would tell myself to not be afraid to slow down, that things take the time they take. I think I've always been very intense and, kind of leaning into my generation's cultural drive to, you have to be this 30 on this 30 under 30 list kind of thing. And I'm past 30 now. So, but yeah, just to slow. Work craft takes the time that it takes, and you just have to let it take the time that it takes. Stick with it.
I love it. Raymond?
Yeah, for me, I agree with what Des and Canisia say there. I like this trusting your doubt, and I like that kind of idea of not being too impressionable, to the culture and what is happening in the culture outside of where you are at with your own practice. And I think that's something that I'd always struggled with, accepting where I'm at, because you're reading work by artists who are later in their life and they've been 30, 40 years deep into their craft, and you're reading that and feeling sometimes insecure in comparison, and that's not really ever been useful, actually, that kind of comparison. So I think that's what my advice would be. Try to relax and have fun and enjoy where you're at with your craft, enjoy it.
Yes.
Amen,
Des is
amen.
in church. Des is in church right now, just
Listen.
praising Raymond.
So you talked about Dion Brand. I remember reading that same collection, No Language is Neutral. I just lying down and being like, I will never write. And now I'm just like, this is so beautiful, and I can just enjoy the, as you put it, the music of the language, because I'm not in the space of comparing myself anymore. It takes the time that it takes, whatever time that it takes. I'm gonna get to where it is. But as we said, we just have to keep writing. It's in us. It's part of us. If we never publish, if we never go anywhere with it, it's your arm. You wouldn't willingly cut off your arm.
Oh gosh, I love it. We do have one audience question from Dr. Georges, which I think actually covers a lot of what we have said. But I think he also made a comment, which I think is a wonderful note to end on. And it is, I like to think of the poet as one in a chorus of voices, not all speaking the same language, and those that share the same language, perhaps maybe not in the same register, but all in the same chorus nonetheless. So on that note, church is over. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much, Des Seabrand, Raymond Antrobus, and Canisia Lubrin. Thank you all who've been viewing. Please have a good night and take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
We know that where you choose to bank matters, and it is your vote on what your funds do in strengthening our community. As your official Bank of Paradise, we invest and support the lifeblood of our economy by helping in the realization of personal goals for homeownership, education, and entrepreneurial visions, which support small businesses. We make it our place to connect with persons and worthy causes, and we have been doing so for more than 30 years. Where your money goes and what your dollars empower are your choice. And we thank you for choosing us, a bank that gives where it matters the most, for you, for our community, and a happier tomorrow. From all of your neighbors at the National Bank of the Virgin Islands.
The win.
What in the hell?
I'm freaking out.
Is about these people.
It's always a pleasure coming to you live and direct from the
What's poppin'? What's really good?